The judge looked up from the marriage license one final time. His voice was calm. "Miss Claire Bennett, this is your last opportunity. If you don't wish to continue, you may walk away." The room fell completely silent. Claire stared at the document in front of her. The pen trembled between her fingers. She wasn't nervous. She was furious, not at the man standing beside her, but at the people who had forced her into this moment. Across the small courthouse, whispers floated through the room. "That's the Bennett heiress. She's really marrying him. He looks like he fixes pickup trucks for a living." Someone quietly laughed. Claire heard every word. She lifted her eyes for the first time. The man beside her stood perfectly still. Simple denim shirt, old brown boots, a faded leather jacket, no expensive watch, no designer shoes, no attempt to impress anyone. He looked ordinary. Too ordinary. His name was Ethan Brooks, a widowed single father, owner of a tiny woodworking shop on the edge of town. The kind of man her family would never acknowledge if they passed him on the street. Yet somehow, today, he was becoming her husband. Claire signed her name. The ink barely dried before every phone inside the courthouse vibrated at exactly the same time. Buzz, buzz, buzz. People instinctively reached into their pockets. Expressions changed. Stock alerts. Breaking financial news. A mysterious private investment group had quietly purchased controlling interests in 3 collapsing Fortune 500 companies before the market opened. Wall Street had erupted. No one knew who was behind it. Claire never checked her phone. She only noticed something strange. Ethan didn't even glance at his, as if whatever had just happened had absolutely nothing to do with him. Or perhaps everything. 3 weeks earlier, Claire Bennett believed her future had already been written. At 29, she was one of the youngest executive directors inside Bennett Global, the century-old company built by her grandfather. Unlike the rest of her family, Claire hadn't inherited her position. She had earned it. After graduating from Columbia University, she'd spent 5 years working in Chicago under a different last name. No family connections. No special treatment. No shortcuts. She wanted people to respect her work, not her surname, but 6 months ago everything changed. Her father called. "You need to come home." There was no explanation. There never was. When Richard Bennett asked, people obeyed, especially family. Richard Bennett wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. Power had taught him that quiet people controlled rooms longer than angry ones. Claire found him inside the family estate's private study. Dark walnut walls, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace that had never actually been used. Her stepmother, Vanessa, stood beside the window. Her cousin Marcus leaned comfortably against the bar. No one smiled. Richard folded his hands. "The company is under attack." Claire frowned. "What happened?" Marcus answered first. "A hostile acquisition." Richard shot him a look. "I was going to explain." He slid several confidential reports across the desk. Claire opened the first file. Her heart slowed, then stopped. Hidden debt, failed overseas expansion, cash reserves disappearing. Someone had been quietly buying Bennett Global shares for almost a year. Very carefully, very intelligently, whoever it was, understood corporate warfare better than anyone she'd ever seen. How long has this been happening? Richard looked away. "Long enough." Claire closed the folder. "You waited until now to tell me." "I waited until I found a solution." Those words instantly made her uncomfortable. What solution? No one answered. Instead, Richard pushed another folder across the desk. Inside was a marriage agreement. Claire laughed, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. "You can't be serious." "I am. I'm not marrying a stranger." "You'll marry this one." Richard opened a photograph. The same man now standing beside her in court. Simple clothes, standing outside a small woodworking shop, holding the hand of a little girl with bright curls and a missing front tooth. Ethan Brooks. Occupation. Owner Brooks Woodcraft. Annual income barely enough to keep the business alive. Relationship status, widowed, 1 daughter, 8 years old. Claire looked back at her father. "You expect me to believe this man can save Bennett Global?" Richard's answer came without emotion. "He already has." Claire stared. "What does that even mean?" "He controls the debt." Silence. She blinked. "Impossible." Marcus leaned forward. "The loans passed through 7 holding companies. No one knows who actually owns them." Claire looked back at Ethan's photograph. Old truck, dusty boots, weathered hands, nothing about him made sense. "You expect me to marry a broke carpenter?" who somehow controls billions in corporate debt. Richard stood. I expect you to save this family. Claire felt something break inside her. No. Richard walked toward the window. If you refuse, 23,000 employees lose their jobs. The company disappears. Your grandfather's foundation closes. Hospitals lose funding. Scholarships end. And every family depending on Bennett Global pays the price. He turned. I'll ask one last time. Claire swallowed, not because she was convinced, because she already knew. She had no choice. 2 days later, she married him, and somehow. The strangest part wasn't becoming Ethan Brooks' wife. It was the way he looked at her afterward. No celebration, no pride, no excitement, only quiet respect. As they walked toward the courthouse parking lot, he opened the passenger door of an old blue pickup truck. I'm sorry, he said softly. Claire looked at him. For what? For the way this happened. She frowned. You got exactly what you wanted. For the first time, Ethan's eyes showed something she couldn't understand. I don't think either of us did. He closed the door gently, started the truck, and drove toward the small town where his daughter was waiting to meet the woman who had never wanted to become part of their family. Claire stared out the window. She thought she was driving toward the worst mistake of her life. She had no idea that before the month was over, she would discover the quiet man behind the steering wheel had spent years hiding one of the greatest fortunes on earth. Claire expected disappointment. She expected peeling paint, a leaking roof, a cramped little house that smelled of old furniture and forgotten dreams. Instead, Ethan turned onto a quiet tree-lined street where children rode bicycles without anyone watching over them. Neighbors waved from front porches. Someone was mowing a lawn. A golden retriever lazily crossed the road. The neighborhood wasn't wealthy, but it felt alive, real. Ethan parked beside a modest white cottage with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. Flower boxes overflowed with bright red geraniums. A wooden swing hung from the porch ceiling. Wind chimes danced gently in the afternoon breeze. Claire looked around. This is your house. Ethan nodded. It isn't much. She didn't answer. It wasn't small because of neglect. It was small because someone had chosen peace over appearances. That confused her more than she cared to admit. As Ethan unlocked the front door, a little voice exploded from inside. Dad. Tiny footsteps raced across hardwood floors. A little girl burst into the hallway so fast she nearly crashed into him. She couldn't have been older than 8. Curly brown hair tied into a messy ponytail, freckles across her nose. Paint stains on her jeans. She hugged Ethan with both arms. Mrs. Johnson let me eat 2 cookies. Ethan laughed. I figured she would. Then the little girl noticed Claire. She froze. Big blue eyes blinked once, twice. Then she smiled. So, she whispered dramatically, you're the lady Dad married. Claire had prepared herself for awkwardness. Questions, maybe resentment. Instead, the little girl walked closer, held out her tiny hand, and said, I'm Sophie. Claire shook it carefully. I'm Claire. Sophie tilted her head. You look sad. Claire wasn't expecting honesty. Children had a way of seeing things adults tried to hide. I'm just tired. Sophie considered that answer. Then she smiled again. That's okay. When I'm tired, Dad makes grilled cheese. It's impossible to stay sad after grilled cheese. Claire couldn't help it. The corner of her mouth moved. Barely, but Ethan noticed. He said nothing. The house surprised her. Everything had a place. Bookshelves lined one wall, not expensive decorations. Books, history, astronomy, gardening, woodworking, even children's science encyclopedias. A telescope stood beside the living room window. Family photographs covered another wall. Camping trips, beach days, birthday cakes, snowball fights. Every picture contained the same thing, joy. There wasn't a single photograph taken in front of expensive cars, private jets, or luxury vacations, just moments. Real moments, Claire suddenly realized. Her own family mansion had hundreds of framed portraits, yet she couldn't remember seeing a single genuinely happy photograph. Dad built almost everything. Sophie's voice interrupted her thoughts. She proudly pointed around the room. The table, the shelves, my bed, the treehouse, the porch swing. Claire looked toward Ethan. You made all this. He shrugged. I enjoy working with my hands. Simple answer, no pride. No need for praise. Dinner was ready 40 minutes later. Claire immediately noticed something strange. No one reached for their phones, no television played in the background. They simply talked. Sophie explained how she'd accidentally embarrassed her science teacher by correcting a fact about Saturn's moons. Ethan listened like every word mattered. When Claire spoke, they listened to her too. No interruptions, no judgment. No hidden agenda, just conversation. It felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. Later that evening, Claire carried her suitcase upstairs. The guest room overlooked the backyard. She opened the curtains. A small workshop sat beneath two old oak trees. Warm light glowed through its windows. She watched Ethan disappear inside carrying a wooden toolbox. Curious, she quietly walked outside. The workshop door stood half open. She wasn't trying to spy, at least that's what she told herself. Inside, Ethan carefully restored an old rocking horse. Its paint had faded decades ago. One wooden wheel had broken completely. His movements were slow, patient, precise. Not because anyone would ever pay him enough to justify the effort, but because he genuinely cared. Claire finally spoke. "I thought you repaired furniture." "I do. Who's paying for this?" "No one." He smiled slightly. It belonged to Sophie's mother. Claire immediately regretted asking. "I'm sorry." He sanded another piece of wood before answering. "Don't be. I'd rather remember someone with gratitude than sadness." His voice held no bitterness, no self-pity, just acceptance. Claire didn't know anyone who spoke like that. That night, she couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, she walked downstairs for water. The kitchen lights were off. Only moonlight filled the room. She noticed someone sitting alone on the back porch. Ethan, coffee mug in one hand, old notebook in the other. He wasn't writing, just staring into the distance. Thinking, she almost went back upstairs. Then, his phone vibrated. He answered immediately. Yes. Silence. Claire couldn't hear the other person. Ethan finally spoke again. "No. I already made my decision." Another pause. "I don't care what the board thinks. They'll understand eventually." His voice remained calm, almost emotionless. Claire frowned. "Board? What board?" She stepped back before he could notice her. Maybe she'd misunderstood. Maybe it was the local school board or the neighborhood association. Still, something about the conversation didn't fit. The next morning, Claire decided to visit Ethan's woodworking shop. She expected an ordinary little business. Instead, she found customers waiting before the doors even opened. A young couple. An elderly woman. A restaurant owner. Everyone greeted Ethan by name, not because he was important, because they genuinely liked him. One elderly customer quietly handed him an envelope. "My grandson got into college. I wanted to pay you back." Ethan pushed the envelope back across the counter. "I told you. That wasn't a loan. It was help." The old man's eyes filled with tears. "I'll never forget what you did." Ethan simply smiled. "You already repaid me. Your grandson gets a chance." "That's enough." Claire watched from across the workshop. No cameras, no audience, no publicity, no social media, just kindness when no one was watching. For reasons she couldn't explain, that disturbed her more than any billionaire ever could, because truly generous people were incredibly rare, and somehow, she had married one. She still believed Ethan Brooks was nothing more than a struggling single father. She still believed the marriage was nothing but a business arrangement. But for the first time, she found herself wondering one dangerous question. Who was this man? Before she ever met him, 3 days later, Claire stopped looking at Ethan as a husband she had been forced to marry. She started looking at him the way she used to study financial reports, searching for patterns. Searching for things that didn't belong, because the more she watched him, the less sense he made every morning. He left the house at exactly 7:05, never early, never late. He kissed Sophie's forehead, packed her lunch, checked her homework, watered the flowers on the porch, then drove his old pickup to the woodworking shop. His life looked perfectly ordinary, too ordinary, one Thursday afternoon. Claire stopped by the shop to bring Ethan the folder he'd forgotten on the kitchen table. She expected to find him sanding furniture. Instead, she froze in the doorway. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom was parked outside the workshop. Its polished paint reflected the afternoon sun. 2 men in tailored suits stood beside it. Both looked uncomfortable, not impatient, respectful, almost nervous. Claire stepped behind a stack of lumber before anyone noticed her. Inside the office, she heard only pieces of the conversation. The board voted unanimously. "No," Ethan's calm voice answered. "You can tell them my answer hasn't changed." The Singapore expansion cannot move forward. Sir, it's a $12 billion opportunity. I said no. A long silence followed. One of the suited men lowered his voice. But the investors expect. They expect profits. Ethan interrupted gently. I expect people. If that's still difficult for them to understand after 8 years, they should find another chairman. Understand after 8 years. They should find another chairman. Claire stopped breathing. Chairman, 12 billion, the office door opened. She quickly stepped outside before anyone could see her. 30 seconds later, the Rolls-Royce quietly drove away. Ethan walked out carrying nothing more than a cup of coffee. When he noticed Claire, he smiled exactly the same way he always did. Everything okay? Claire forced herself to nod. You forgot this. She handed him the folder. He thanked her. Nothing about his face suggested he had just ended a conversation involving billions of dollars. That night, Claire couldn't stop thinking about what she'd heard. Maybe she had misunderstood. Again, maybe the conversation belonged to someone else. Maybe her thoughts were interrupted by Sophie. Claire. She looked up. Sophie stood in the hallway holding a shoebox. I want to show you something. Inside the box were hundreds of photographs, camping trips, Christmas mornings, birthday parties. Science fairs, every picture included Ethan. Every picture included Sophie. None included expensive vacations, luxury homes, or famous people, just life. Then Claire noticed one photograph tucked beneath the others, unlike the rest. This one was older. Ethan looked younger, clean-shaven, wearing a perfectly tailored Navy suit, standing beside several world leaders at an international economic summit. Claire's heartbeat stopped before she could study it. Sophie quickly took it back. Oh, that's Daddy's old picture. Claire looked up. Old picture. Daddy says that was before. Before what? Sophie shrugged. Before he learned what mattered. Claire stared. What does that mean? I don't know. He always smiles when I ask. Then Sophie skipped away, leaving Claire alone with more questions than answers. The following Monday, Claire returned to Bennett Global for an emergency executive meeting. The atmosphere inside headquarters felt different. Fear had replaced confidence. Every department head looked exhausted. Her father stood beside the conference table. The acquisition attempt has accelerated. Claire frowned. I thought we still had 6 weeks. We don't. A large screen lit up. Charts turned red. Our remaining institutional lenders are pulling out. Someone whispered, we're finished. Silence swallowed the room. Richard Bennett slowly looked around the table. Then, for the first time in Claire's life, her father admitted something she never thought she'd hear. I don't know how to save this company. Claire drove home in silence. Rain covered the windshield. She barely noticed. By the time she reached the cottage, she felt completely defeated. She expected an empty house. Instead, the kitchen smelled of fresh bread. Soup simmered quietly on the stove. Soft music played from an old radio. Sophie sat at the table coloring planets. Ethan looked up. One glance at Claire's face, and he knew. Bad day. She nodded. He didn't ask another question. Didn't offer advice. Didn't pretend to fix something he hadn't even heard yet. He simply placed a warm bowl of soup in front of her. Then he sat beside Sophie, helping her color Saturn's rings. The silence somehow felt safer than words. Later that night, Claire stood outside on the porch. Rain tapped softly against the roof. I think we're going to lose everything. She hadn't realized Ethan had walked outside. He leaned against the porch railing. Maybe. She looked at him. That's all you have to say. He smiled faintly. No. He looked toward the dark trees. I think sometimes people spend so much time protecting what they built. They forget why they built it. Claire laughed bitterly. Easy to say. You've never had billions at stake. For the first time, Ethan looked directly into her eyes. His answer came almost as a whisper. You'd be surprised. Claire frowned. What does that mean? He didn't answer. Instead, his phone vibrated once. He glanced at the screen, then quietly slipped it back into his pocket without replying. But Claire noticed one thing. The notification wasn't from a person. It was from a secure financial network, used almost exclusively by global investment firms. A network she herself had only accessed once during her years on Wall Street. She looked at Ethan. He calmly watched the rain, as though nothing unusual had happened, yet somewhere deep inside, Claire felt the same instinct that had made her one of the best analysts in New York. The numbers never lied, and neither did patterns. The man she had married was hiding something enormous. She simply hadn't uncovered it. Yet, Claire didn't sleep. Every clue circled endlessly in her mind. The Rolls-Royce, the $12 billion conversation, the old summit photograph, the secure financial notification. None of it belonged to the man who spent his afternoons repairing dining tables and rocking chairs. By sunrise, she had made a decision. She was going to learn the truth. The next morning, after Ethan dropped Sophie at school, Claire quietly walked into his workshop, not to invade his privacy, only to answer one question: who are you? The workshop smelled of cedar and fresh-cut oak. Everything was perfectly organized. Hand tools hung neatly on the wall, blueprints covered one workbench. Family photos sat beside a coffee mug. Nothing looked unusual, until she noticed an old metal cabinet tucked into the corner. One drawer wasn't completely closed. Inside, there were no bank statements, no secret passports, no stacks of cash, only a leather folder. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single invitation: Global Leadership Summit, Private Chairman's Session. Admit one, Guest of Honor, Alexander Ethan Brooks. Claire stared at the name. Alexander, she had only ever known him as Ethan Brooks. Before she could read further, "Ethan," a voice came from outside. Claire quickly closed the folder and stepped away. Two men in dark suits entered the workshop. They looked around. One noticed her immediately. "Mrs. Brooks." She nodded cautiously. "We're looking for Mr. Brooks. He's not here." The older man smiled politely. "We know. We're early." Claire frowned. "Who are you?" The younger man exchanged a glance with his partner. "We work with your husband at the woodworking shop." Both men almost smiled. "You could say that." 20 minutes later, Ethan arrived. The moment he stepped inside, both men stood, not casually, immediately, like soldiers greeting a commander. Claire noticed everything. Neither man spoke first, neither offered a handshake. They waited. Ethan sighed softly. "I told you I wasn't coming." The older man answered carefully. "The board believes your presence is necessary." "I retired. You stepped away. There's a difference." "The markets don't believe there is." Silence filled the workshop. Finally, Ethan looked toward Claire. "I'm sorry. I'll be gone a few hours." She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Instead, she simply nodded. The black sedan disappeared down the road. Claire stood outside the workshop, watching until it vanished. Her phone buzzed. It was her father. "Where are you?" "Home. Cancel your afternoon." "Why?" "There's an emergency meeting downtown." "What happened?" Richard's voice sounded different, almost nervous. "The founder of Harlow Strategic Holdings is making a public appearance." Claire frowned. "So, you don't understand. No one has seen him in nearly 9 years. The entire financial world is shutting down to watch." By noon, every major business network carried the same headline: "The Ghost of Wall Street returns today." Claire had never heard that nickname before. She searched quickly. Thousands of articles appeared. Most were locked behind financial publications. Some headlines caught her attention. "The billionaire who walked away at 32. The investor who disappeared without selling a single share. Why every CEO still fears Alexander Brooks." Brooks, her heart skipped. No, it couldn't be. The Global Leadership Center overlooked the city skyline. Private security surrounded the entrance. Luxury vehicles stretched for blocks. Claire entered using her Bennett Global credentials. Inside, the atmosphere felt electric. Fortune 500 CEOs, world-famous investors, government officials, people who rarely waited for anyone, were waiting today. She took her seat. The enormous auditorium slowly fell silent. The lights dimmed. A woman walked onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, it has been almost a decade. Please welcome the founder of Harlow Strategic Holdings." The side doors opened. Claire casually turned her head, then froze. Her breathing stopped. Every thought disappeared. Walking calmly toward the stage, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, was Ethan, not nervous, not excited, simply calm. The same calm man who packed Sophie's lunch every morning. The same man who repaired old furniture for strangers. The same man who apologized for a marriage neither of them had chosen. Around the auditorium, something extraordinary happened. More than 2,000 people stood, not because anyone asked them to, because respect demanded it. Standing ovation. CEOs, billionaires, presidents, everyone. Claire remained frozen in her seat. Ethan reached the podium. He looked across the audience. His eyes found hers immediately. Neither moved, neither smiled, one heartbeat. Two, then he began speaking. Good afternoon. His quiet voice filled the auditorium. No microphone tricks. No dramatic entrance, just confidence. For the next 40 minutes, he explained global markets with breathtaking simplicity. Complex financial systems suddenly sounded effortless. People wrote notes as fast as they could. Several CEOs stopped typing entirely, simply listening. Claire had spent years studying finance. She had never heard anyone think this clearly. By the time Ethan finished, the audience erupted, not applause, respect. The kind that couldn't be purchased, only earned, as executives crowded toward the stage. Claire remained where she was, unable to move, unable to think. Finally, Ethan walked toward her. The room quietly parted to let him pass. He stopped only a few feet away. Claire. She searched his face. You. Her voice disappeared. You've known. He answered gently, yes. For how long? A long time. You let me believe that you were poor. I let you believe I was happy. She blinked. What? I never lied. I own the woodworking shop. I am Sophie's father. I prefer this life. Claire whispered, you're one of the richest men in the world. Ethan smiled softly. I've been called worse. Ethan smiled softly. I've been called worse. For the first time since meeting him, Claire laughed, not because anything was funny, because her entire world had just turned upside down, and somehow, the billionaire standing before her still felt exactly like the humble man who made grilled cheese sandwiches and tucked his daughter into bed every night. Claire and Ethan left the conference center through a private exit. Neither of them spoke during the drive home. The city blurred past the windows. Luxury towers, crowded intersections, flashing billboards, none of it mattered. Claire kept stealing glances at him. The same hands that repaired broken chairs. Had quietly built one of the largest investment empires in America. She still couldn't understand it. Finally, she broke the silence. Why? Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Why what? Why would someone with billions live in a little cottage, drive an old pickup, and spend his days making furniture? For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he smiled sadly, because I already lived the other life. When they reached home, Sophie was spending the afternoon at a friend's house. The house was unusually quiet. Ethan placed 2 mugs of coffee on the kitchen table. Claire noticed something. His movements hadn't changed, not even after she knew the truth. No arrogance, no performance, just Ethan. He sat across from her. I suppose you deserve the whole story. Claire nodded. I'd like that. 14 years ago, I started an investment company with my best friend. We had nothing. 1 rented office, 3 folding chairs, and more confidence than experience. Claire listened without interrupting. We worked 18-hour days. We built something extraordinary. Within 6 years, we were managing more money than anyone expected. We became headlines, television interviews, magazine covers, awards, private jets. He looked down at his coffee, and then I discovered something. What? My best friend had been stealing. Claire frowned. From the company. No, from our clients. Silence settled over the kitchen. It wasn't just money. It was trust. He believed people would never notice. But I noticed. What happened? I reported everything. I paid every investor back. Every dollar. Even the money I wasn't legally responsible for. Claire whispered, that must have cost billions. It did, but losing money wasn't the hardest part. What was? He looked toward the hallway where Sophie's drawings covered the wall. Realizing I no longer knew who to trust. My wife, he continued quietly, left a year earlier. She loved the lifestyle. When that disappeared, so did she. Claire lowered her eyes. I had a 2-year-old daughter. And I suddenly realized, if Sophie grew up inside that world, she'd spend her entire life wondering whether people loved her, or loved what she represented. So, I disappeared. You just walked away. I stepped away. I placed everything inside independent trusts. I hired professionals to manage the companies. I stopped attending interviews. I stopped appearing in public. I bought a small house. I opened a woodworking shop. And for the first time in years, I could hear birds in the morning. Claire smiled faintly. You traded boardrooms for bird songs. Ethan laughed. It was the best investment I ever made. Claire sat quietly. Everything finally made sense. The neighborhood, the workshop, the kindness, the peaceful life. He hadn't been hiding because he was afraid. He had been protecting the only thing money could never replace, his daughter. But then, Claire asked, "Why agree to marry me?" Ethan's smile disappeared. "Because of your uncle." "My uncle, Michael Bennett." Claire frowned. "He came to see me 6 weeks ago. He knew exactly who I was." "How? We met years ago." "When my company financed one of his projects." Claire's stomach tightened. "He asked you to save Bennett Global." "Yes, and I refused." "You refused?" "Twice." Claire looked surprised. "What changed?" Ethan stood. He walked toward the living room, picked up a thin folder from a shelf, then handed it to her. Inside were newspaper articles, performance reviews, charity reports, interviews, all about Claire. He had been reading about her for 3 days. "I tried deciding whether helping your family was the right thing. Then I read about you." Claire looked up. "Me?" "You, the analyst who rejected promotions she hadn't earned. The executive who anonymously paid medical bills for former employees. The woman who argued against laying off factory workers." He smiled softly. "You reminded me of someone." "Who?" "The person I used to be." Claire couldn't speak. "I agreed." Ethan continued. "On one condition." "What condition?" "That the marriage would only happen if you chose it freely." Claire looked away. "I didn't." "I know." He answered gently. "I realized that the day I saw your face in the courthouse." Tears filled Claire's eyes. "So every breakfast, every dinner, the shoes you repaired, the tea, you weren't pretending." "No, I felt guilty at first." He smiled, but after a while, "I stopped doing kind things because I felt responsible. I started doing them because—" He hesitated. Claire waited. "Because I wanted you to smile." Silence filled the kitchen. Neither of them looked away before either could speak again. The front door burst open. Sophie's laughter echoed through the hallway. "Dad." She ran inside carrying a cardboard box. "You have to see this." Ethan knelt beside her. "What is it?" She proudly opened the lid. Inside sat 3 tiny abandoned kittens. Claire laughed through her tears. "Sophie, where did you find those?" "They were behind Mrs. Carter's bakery. Their mommy never came back." She looked at Ethan with hopeful eyes. "Can we help them?" Ethan glanced toward Claire, then smiled. "I think we'd better ask your new stepmom." Sophie's eyes immediately turned toward Claire. "Please." Claire looked at the kittens, then at Ethan, then back at Sophie for the first time. The word felt natural. "Yes, we'll help them." Sophie's excited scream filled the entire house. But hundreds of miles away, inside a glass office overlooking Manhattan, another man wasn't smiling. Victor Kane dropped a newspaper onto his desk. The headline covered the front page. "The Ghost Billionaire Returns." Beside the article was Ethan's photograph. Victor stared at it coldly. "So, you're finally back." He pressed a button on his desk. His chief of security entered. "I want everything. His companies, his family, his weaknesses, and the woman he married." The security chief nodded. Victor smiled. "If Ethan Brooks wants to step back into my world, I'm going to remind him exactly why he left it." That night, while Claire stood on the porch watching the stars, she had no idea that someone had already declared war on the family she was only beginning to love. She was only beginning to love.